breaking news, 2 planes smashed into one of the twin towers of New York's landmark World Trade Center a few moments ago. A witness reported a sonic boom as a commercial passenger jet...
It's been 5 days since the world witnessed one of the worst terrorist attacks ever. Yet, the images of disaster and grief continue to haunt.
I feel in total shock. As an American, it's unbelievable because we've lived such a safe reality for so long that the idea that this could happen in our country is impossible to even conceive.
As rescue efforts continue around the clock, the surprise attacks have raised concerns of the vulnerabilities of countries even back home.
I think it could happen even in Singapore. It could happen anywhere.
Such a building with so many people inside, it's just unimaginable that such things can actually happen. You know, people actually do such things to innocent people. It shows that terrorism there's no boundaries for terrorism. So we may be small, but we might be a target ourselves.
Disbelief, shock, horror, just some of the emotions people around the world went through as key American landmarks fell to terrorist attacks on Tuesday. Well, you're watching Talking Point. I'm Melissa Hiak. Tonight, we take a look at the aftermath and crisis engulfing America following the attack and the impact on Singaporeans and people around the region. In studio with me, Singapore Member of Parliament R. Ravindran. Ravindran is also the Deputy Group Parliamentary Committee Chairman for the Ministries of Defense and Foreign Affairs. Nicholas de Boursac, Managing Director of American Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. And Dr. Brian Yeo, psychiatrist and an expert in crisis counseling. Tonight, this Talking Point special will be joined by regional viewers. So share your views, call us at 691-0028 for all local calls. And if you're joining us from the region, the country code is 65. Well, right now, let's hear from a couple of callers already on the line. Hello, welcome to Talking Point. I believe the first caller is Lowell.
Yes, that's right. My name is Lowell Groman. I'm calling from Singapore.
Right, Lowell, what would you like to, what's your reaction?
My reaction initially was, as others, I'm sure, was of shock and disbelief. And really, in the days since the tragedy has occurred, I think we have all come to see this as an attack, not just on the United States, but an attack on the way of life that exists in many parts of the world, and we could call it the civilized way of life. That it's one where we trust in our fellow man, and we trust that such things are not going to, and freedoms are not going to be abused. But this is certainly a case where that's not true. I think it has caused us all to rethink the way that we're going to be living our lives in terms of travel, and it's a mortifying and deeply sad event.
Well, Lou, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I think we have another caller on the line, also, I believe, an American who's in Singapore. Hello, welcome to Talking Point, Rick.
Hi.
Hi. And what would you like to add? Do you share some of what Lowell has said?
Unfortunately, I couldn't hear what he said.
Right, but so what's your reaction then?
I guess similar to what many people felt, and that wasn't in any way confined to just Americans, but initially was disbelief that something like this could actually happen, followed by anger, and then I guess a sense of reality stepped in. And 3 points really that I'd like to share with the audience, the first of which is that we're all vulnerable to something, to attacks such as these, including the U.S. The U.S. in many ways has been fortunate over the years that this hasn't happened more often. Secondly, that people who are willing to give their lives are a threat. There's very little, I think, perhaps that we can do to protect ourselves from them, short of the world coming together as a group. This is not a national threat confined, say, to the Americas or, for that matter, to Europe, but it's a global threat. And I think it's time that the world came together and rid the world of these terrorists. That's what I wanted to say.
Rick, thank you very much. First, let me put this question to Ravindran. Do you see perhaps some kind of paradigm shift in the way countries now might perceive threats, that they might have to relook at their defense strategies, their total defense strategies? Would there be perhaps a further rise and focus in civil defense efforts?
Yes, I think over the last decade, if one looks at the emerging threats, many of the defense establishments have identified that there are new emerging threats from what I would call non-conventional forces. Now, terrorist groups are one of these new threats that are being faced by many countries, and this is a threat that has to be taken very seriously. And these latest two incidents clearly highlight that threats will come in any form, and that the enemy of the future will not be one who will wear a uniform and come with a big force, but he will be somebody who will emerge on the scene, create havoc, and hit at the key targets across different sectors of the country, whether it's economic, political, or a key target of relating to any of the country's important assets.
But certainly all these were evident. I'm sure the relevant intelligence agencies would already have known about the existence of such threats. So do you see perhaps an overhaul in how they view in terms of, because in terms of defense, most countries tend to focus a lot more on hardware perhaps, yes, and even in information warfare, in biological warfare, this came completely out of the blue.
I think the threat was always there, but I think the magnitude of the threat has not been realized by many people. It has been discussed among defense experts in many of the seminars, but for something to happen for real, I think from now onwards it will be taken very seriously, and I think in future the need for forward intelligence, or what I would call early intelligence, is something that everyone has to pay great attention. And here I think the world defense intelligence security apparatus have to be alert to this emerging threat, and they will have to work very hard to establish early intelligence so that many of these events can be prevented at a much earlier stage rather than wait for it to happen and then work on how to prevent it in future. Right. So this is certainly a lesson for many countries, particularly many countries which first faces threats from new sources.
Right. Okay, Nick, let's look at the sort of targets that were attacked in the U.S. Very pertinently, it was the World Trade Center, and that is the symbol of world economy, or U.S. economy and world economy. And it was obviously done to affect the morale of American business community. Mm-hmm. How has it affected it so far?
I think it was very clearly targeted as a symbol. Having said that, I think the reaction we've seen from America is in fact somewhat of a defiance towards the terrorists and an eagerness to get back to business as soon as possible. I think the stock market is going to be open again tomorrow, and great efforts are made to create normality again. And I think this is the sign of the strength of the American people, this determination not to let these terrorists actually change the way they do business. And I think that's admirable.
Right. Okay, I think we have another two callers on the line. There is Kathy. Kathy, welcome to Talking Point.
Hello.
Hi, Kathy. You're calling from which country?
No, I'm Singapore. Bukit Timah.
Oh, Bukit Timah in Singapore.
Yes.
Hi. What would you like to tell us?
Okay, I think basically I share the same feeling the previous two speakers, and I think that any kind of preventive measure is a good measure, but then how effective it is yet to be proven, you see. You know, I believe that any international airport, their security are pretty tight, but still such thing happens. Nobody will expect that these terrorists will attack on the domestic, flights.
Right. Well, Kathy, thank you very much for that.
What I would like to highlight with the speaker is that the threat was not going to come only in the form of hijacked aeroplanes. The threat will come in any form in future. It could be worm warfare, germ warfare. It could be warfare by means of biological warfare, and it could be, next time it could be a truck which is packed with explosives. So it's going to come in many forms, and my point was basically that we got to be aware of these threats and be prepared for it.
Okay, we have another caller. Actually, it was someone we've taken the pains to try and contact. She's a Singaporean in New York, and that's Lisa, I believe. Lisa?
Hi.
Hi, good to hear that you're well. Tell us about your experience in New York after this crisis happened.
All right. I live at the Greenwich Village area, about 1.5 miles north of the site where the World Trade Center used to stand. I'm a student at the New York University School of Law. And I think I just like to convey a bit of the sentiment on the ground here in the area and the immediate vicinity of where the attacks happened. I think at the start there was a great deal of shock. I can't even begin to describe the disbelief, feeling of something entirely surreal or nightmarish about it. People were on the street just staring at the two towers burning. I saw the second tower collapse, and there were screams, and then there was just a gaping silence in a sense. People just didn't want to or weren't able to register the fact that it actually happened. And since then, I think the sentiment which has dominated largely is a sense of collective agony, a sense of helplessness, and a sense of grief. I mean, being so nearby, you can't help but feel that the tragedy is very, very real.
I understand that you attended a memorial service or something.
I attended a number of candlelight vigils at the Washington Square Park and the Union Square Park, which are both very near where I live. And there's just, it's the kind of scene where you have a lot of candles, you have a lot of flowers, and you have a lot of people just crying, a lot of people just staring into space, and also relatives have been posting up posters of missing ones. Relatives who refuse to give up hope. You listen to them shift from talking to someone in the past tense to the present tense, and it's really heart-wrenching because there's so little chance that anyone will be found, and yet they refuse to give up. And I think it's very hard for them to have any sort of closure or any sort of resolution because most of the victims are faceless at the moment. You can't find many, bodies, and you can't really identify many people at the moment. So there is that sense of helplessness and grief. Yesterday I passed by a fire station in Greenwich Village, and that was also a heart-wrenching sight because you saw lots of flowers, lots of candles, and people just sort of taking the moment to really thank the rescue workers who have given so much and who themselves have lost their lives and who have lost their friends in the process as well. But I think that has been the general mood, one of grief, one of a sense of a standstill, at least in southern Manhattan. They've only just started opening the roads again. In the area where I was living, you couldn't enter without proper identification for the last few days, but now
and what's the positive? Is there anything that's positive that's come out of this whole thing that you've observed?
If there's anything positive, I guess it's a sense of solidarity and unity. People always say that that New Yorkers, the stereotype of the busy, the self-interested, the car horn blasting New Yorker. And while there's always a danger in stereotypes, they always contain with them a certain element of truth. But in the last few days, you don't hear that kind of car horn. You hear, in fact, people cheering rescue workers on the streets. You hear people trying to volunteer, wanting to donate blood. And while there's been a great deal of solemnity and a somberness about everything, there's also a unity in grief in trying to help the rescue workers, in trying to offer some sort of comfort to those who are still looking for their missing ones.
Well, Lisa, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it here for the moment. Thank you, and do take care. Well, once again, to join in the discussion, call us at 691-0028. We have to go for a break soon. But if you're calling from outside Singapore, the country code is 65. Stay with us.
Freeze your upgrade cost for 2 whole years with Microsoft. Act fast and we'll even protect your IT investment.
News is information. Information keeping the human race alive. Information going out of control. Information moving the human spirit. Information helping them live their dreams. Information saving a life. Information getting out of hand. Information is news. Get yours on Channel News Asia.
The US market has been closed for nearly a week now, and that's the longest time in 80 years. Trading is expected to resume on Monday. We'll bring you all the action live from New York, so watch it right here on Channel News Asia.
Behind the sadness and the exhaustion, there is a desire by the American people to not seek only revenge, but to win a war against barbaric behavior, people that hate freedom and hate what we stand for.
This is a war. It's the way they see it. You can't see it any other way, whether legally that is correct or not. We've got to respond as if it is a war. And we've got to respond in the sense that it isn't going to be solved with a single counterattack against one individual. It's going to be a long-term conflict, and it's going to be fought on many fronts.
With over 50,000 reserve troops activated, the looming threat of a war is becoming a reality around the world.
I'm sure there will be a war. I'm convinced. The Americans, they're extremely proud of their heritage, their nationality, and they're very nationalistic. I think they're going to go for a retaliation.
Well, I think the whole world is really affected by it because America is such a big place, and it's like if it starts a war, then the whole world could be involved in it.
I'm sure they will be very prudent in what they do because as what I understand from the news, a lot of countries are also afraid that they may be targeted themselves. So I think it's going to be very complicated retaliation.
I hope U.S. don't intervene other countries' problem that much anymore. That's what I concern. Hopefully the things can be settled down.
How do you go about making right something that's wrong? You do more wrong? I don't know. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult decision for a government to do.
You're watching Talking Point. We'd like you to share your thoughts on the recent terrorist attacks in the USA. The telephone number is 691-0028, and if you're calling us from the region, the country code is 65. Now, throughout the past couple of days, Talking Point received an overwhelming number of emails, more than 170 at the last count. Many sent their condolences and called for restraint. Now, earlier we had a few callers, and I understand that, Nicholas, you'd like to respond to some of the things that were said by one of our callers. Lisa.
Lisa, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd like to, what I found was interesting about what she said is the sentiment of solidarity that she sensed in New York. And I was at the St. Ignatius Church on Friday evening, which was overflowing. There was a service there held in the commemoration of this event on Tuesday night. And what touched me was that not only were there Americans there were Canadians, English, but there were an awful lot of Singaporeans who were there to express their support and sympathy. And that touched me very much. I thought that was really wonderful, and we appreciate that.
Right. And following up on what one of the other callers said, a caller from Singapore, Lowell, he said that this attack is not just an attack on America, but an attack on a way of life, on this trust that people have for each other. Brian, how do you see this event affecting even people in other countries, how people relate to each other, people of different countries, people of different colors?
Right. I think, firstly, the whole worldview of many people have changed. I mean, America and Singapore, we're all interconnected global cities. And seeing something that you feel is an anchor in your world, the way you see the world, America, superpower, New York, a big city, someone we feel that can be even a world's policeman, being crumbling. I mean, your sense is already being shattered. In some ways, your confidence levels is being affected to some degree. And added to that, you now have the recession looming. You have problems with jobs being lost. You have competition coming in. And in this sense, that there's an impending war about to happen. Certainly, the level of trust will be affected. The sense of urgency to go on to develop new business may be affected. And I think for many people, this sense is a bit shaken in the way how you see yourself, how you see the world. And for some people, it could be a bit more than others. What I think is that although the grief is there, most times you just see the building collapsing. the worst is yet to come when the bodies come out. And I think when they're grieving, when you see the faces to the body, and we're talking about thousands of people.
So how do I know I'm affected by these images?
You will probably, most people will probably be affected if you had someone that you had lost or in these circumstances. But certainly some of the figures that we think will be quite gory, body parts that has been mentioned, burning. And so many times these are images that reach out to our own psyche of fear, death, sudden death, yet loss of lives. And the way of dying is very, very acute and very fearful.
So your advice might be that the media handles this issue with more sensitivity, and that perhaps for people at home, children to be guided, and for even adults to just turn it off if you
Well, I think,
yourself.
I hear your point. I mean, certainly people will discuss with it. And certainly with the wide availability of media, one probably cannot stop all images coming through. I mean, even for recent regional crisis, we have photos on the internet. I don't think that can be stopped. But I think we need to steel ourselves for that and basically have resources for people who have problems. Probably more so at ground zero at New York level, much less here certainly. But certainly for young children, I think we need to be a bit careful. And for people also some people will say things when they see things, when they sudden shock, they will say things about certain countries and certain peoples. And with the death and the images, some of these latent hatred or prejudice may surface. The worst, I think, will be coming when you see the bodies.
Right, okay. Well, I have to get to someone who's waiting on the line, Dorothy, who's working in New York, a Singaporean working in New York. Dorothy?
Hello.
Hi, Dorothy, you're on air. Thanks for agreeing to talk to us on Talking Point. Now, Dorothy, there have been a series of bomb threats in New York. Of course, some of them turned out to be hoaxes. How has the past week affected, perhaps, in light of that the worst is not over yet? How has it affected maybe your way of life in New York, your perspective of New York and of New Yorkers?
Wow. The city is definitely not the same. I mean, you have military planes flying above you. The streets are quieter, it seems emptier. The mood is very somber, but New Yorkers are slowly going back to doing the things that they have to do. A lot of people are still in shock. There's a great sense of loss, and everybody seems to want an explanation. We talk about the future, and New Yorkers talk about rebuilding, but there's also, they talk about rebuilding the sense of sadness and fear, but at the same time they're also optimistic. They've really come together at this time very quickly. There's a great sense of patriotism, and everyone's flying the American flag and putting candles outside their windows and singing and supporting each other. And New Yorkers are very resilient and hardy people, and I think I've gained new respect for the leaders of this city and this country, and just for the other Americans here who are pulling together and helping each other. It's amazing.
Now, I understand that you lived in an apartment where you can actually see what happened. In terms of even things like your own safety, have you had perhaps flashing thoughts about changing your plans, your professional plans, and cutting your sojourn there short?
I can't really say. I mean, we all fear for what's going to happen next, but we can't just leave the city at a drop of a hat. It won't be fair to what the city is about. Everybody came here to make something of themselves, to work hard. And although I have to tell you there is a palpable sort of sense of fear on the streets, but at the same time, everyone is determined to not give in and not just say, I give up and I'm going to leave the city and give up on New York City. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
And that speaks for you as well.
Yes.
Well, Dorothy, thank you very much for joining us on Talking Point. You go well. And also, we have a call from India. Rahul? Hello? Rahul?
Hello.
Hi, welcome to Talking Point. I'm Melissa. And
Hi, Elisa.
Hi, what would you like to tell us about how your reactions, perhaps, to the Tuesday attack on the U.S.? What are your thoughts?
I think it's one of the most despicable things I've ever seen in my life. And the sad part is, what makes it sadder is it took 5,000 people to die before the world realized there's something called terrorism that exists.
And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so, because this is itself is tragedy so big that anything else I can say can't make anything better for anybody. The only thing is now that the world has realized terrorism exists, the acknowledgement cannot be denied. And I'm so glad that the world powers are taking restrained action in this matter also.
Well, Rahul, thank you very much for taking part. Now, Ravi, I'd like to turn the next question to you. Now, currently, Washington is saying if you're not with us, you're against us, and the Taliban is also talking about if any country were to help the US to attack it, it would also retaliate against that country. Are we seeing the beginning of a very long period of difficult international relations? Very tricky, very slippery slope.
I think America has declared that what has happened is a matter of war. And I think they've taken the position that it's a war because of positioning. Because America has to exercise its right to self-defense and also to protect its citizens by taking certain measures. And by declaring war, it's taking certain defense action. It also wants to form a coalition on a worldwide basis, so that whatever action that is going to take is something that is going to be supported by many countries in the world. And hence, it's diplomatic moves in many capitals all over the world to establish a network of support, and not only a support in terms of diplomacy, but also in the area of defense. And I think on the part of the Taliban, they are expecting some sort of reaction from the Americans, particularly by way of armed attacks. So they have taken a position that whoever assists the Americans will also be taken as an act of war against the Taliban. So both of them have started into a position of posturing.
Do you see the world being polarized as a result?
I think it's going to put a lot of burden on a lot of states which are in the Middle East in particular, where there is a sizable number of Muslim populations. So it will put a lot of burden. Even the Pakistanis, one can see that there is a lot of pressure on the Pakistani government. The president has said that he's going to visit China and Saudi Arabia for consultations. So similarly, there will be a lot of other pressures on the other Muslim countries in the Middle East. But I don't see a polarization because just like what happened during the Iraq attack on Kuwait, I think the Americans managed to get a broad support on a worldwide basis. And I suspect that looking at the reaction of countries to what happened on 11th of September, I'm confident that many of the countries will come together, not only to take action against the perpetrators of this crime, but more importantly, to take a common stance against terrorism on a worldwide basis. And I see a good emerging from this whole exercise. I think that terrorism will be taken far more seriously from now onwards, and that this new emerging threat of non-conventional warfare, which I would call, is something that will be taken very seriously, and some sort of mechanism has to be established, not only to prevent them from perpetrating such actions in future, but also to go after organizations and bases in countries where they exist, but also against countries which allow such terrorist groups to operate and to perpetrate their crimes overseas.
Okay, well, we have heard from actually Americans, in Singapore, Americans in New York. Right now, let's get to another part, the West Coast. We have Bob on the line. Bob, thank you for waking up extra early to talk to us on Talking Point. Bob is in Seattle. Bob?
Yes.
Yes. How has life for you and perhaps the people in your community been affected in your part of America by this attack?
Well, the part of the difficulty here is that I work for a company that has several employees who are overseas at the time, and it's been very difficult for them to make connections and to try to get back home in this situation. And on the West Coast, that's compounded by the feeling that although the events have taken place in our country, it's very difficult to be able to feel to bring yourself to have a feeling of being involved in trying to help bring things back to normal. And the part of what I would like to have happen is for things to start to return to normal as soon as possible. But it's going to be a very slow process.
Now, they've talked about how, there will be more threats, there will be more mischief being attempted. Do you feel safe?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Do you feel quite safe where you are? Because there have been warnings that there will be more attempts in the future.
I feel relatively safe. I can't necessarily change my life because there's no way to predict when something of this type is going to happen. unless the world's intelligence community gets a great deal better than it has been to date. I think for the average person, you just have to go about life and live it the best you can. And there's, as I've always felt anyway, when the time comes, your number is just there, and that's it. So I can't see changing my life because of a few extremists and allow them the victory of having me looking over my shoulder all the time.
Bob, a very quick last question. There are people talking about the possibility of the U.S. going to war, that it might escalate into something like a World War III. Would you support it if the Bush administration says, let's go to war? Do you think it's worth it to try and catch these people who are responsible?
Well, I think on some level it is, but I don't think a war as it's being talked about, it will be anything that resembling a war that we might have been familiar with from reading in our history books or having been old enough to see Vietnam on television. I think this is going to be something that is going to be very focused and very limited in its enactment in order to get to those people who are actively involved in this type of activity. Plus, you've got a situation where the world is really getting behind this campaign against terrorism, and this may be one of those things where the vast majority of people in the world can really get behind a campaign and really work together for a change.
Well, Bob, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye. Well, we'll have to pause for a quick break now. Stay with us. We'll see you in a while.
Freeze your upgrade cost for 2 whole years with Microsoft. Act fast and we'll even protect your IT investment.
A gathering of the movers and shakers of international economics and finance. A meeting of the best business minds in the world. In conjunction with the Forbes Global CEO Conference this September, Channel News Asia will be in conversation with CEO of Forbes himself, Steve Forbes. There'll also be interviews with other key players in the conference, as well as coverage of the event on Singapore Business Tonight. Channel News Asia, the official broadcaster of the Forbes Global CEO Conference.
Performance Motors and BMW proudly provide the official vehicles for the Forbes CEO Conference.
M1 presents Alegria, the all-new production from Cirque du Soleil. Priority booking exclusively for M1 customers now through October 7th. Premieres February 28th under the Grand Chapiteau in Singapore. Alegria from Cirque du Soleil, proudly brought to you by M1. Book at Cystic today.
Hello, we're in the final part of this special talking point. This is a regional edition. We're looking at your reactions to the Tuesday attack in the U.S. over the weekend. Now, Nicholas, let me ask you, the world looks to the U.S. economy for direction. How debilitating is this going to be on U.S. businesses?
Well, I think the U.S. economy is obviously a very substantial and a very robust economy. And while this week has obviously been a very unusual week. I mean, really, these are very tragic events, but if you step away from the human tragedy and look at the economic activity, clearly people have been spending their time looking at televisions. And I think this has probably affected consumer spending. It's certainly the airline industry has been affected. And therefore, in the immediate short term, I think there will be a slowing up of activity.
And on this part of the world, because there are about 430 different companies from more than 20 countries housed in the WTC. Would all the energies, or most of the energies, be focused on rebuilding their headquarters or getting their staff? And would they have energies to focus to perhaps investment in this region?
I think the issue there is that, how do I put it? Yeah, there were a lot of companies who had offices there, but not all of them were really the head offices of those companies. The people will have an awful lot of time pulled away from running the businesses to focusing on the human issues and rebuilding the offices that were operating there, moving them to other locations. Okay, so this will definitely impact the companies that were actually housed in those buildings. But these were a few buildings out of thousands of buildings in the United States.
So you're saying that would not have as great an impact on
I don't think the events in the World Trade Center themselves will have a direct impact on the business in the region. I think what will happen is that U.S. executives and board level will hesitate about making new investments in overseas simply because they want to see what's going to happen. So any project that was going to be approved in the next few weeks is probably going to be pushed back a little while till the board has a look to see what's going to happen on the world stage.
Right. Okay, we have, I'm afraid I've got to cut you short. We have two callers waiting. There's Jess. Hello, Jess.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry, who's this? Jess, you're calling from the Philippines?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yeah.
What would you like to add to this discussion?
Well, okay, well, here in Manila, there's a predominant sentiment for most Filipinos that, you know, if it could happen to the Americans, you know, who we traditionally look up to as, you know, former colonizers, you know, per se, what's in store for us? You know, we are much, you know, in a way, not as established as them. There's another concern is for the Philippines is that as an ally and a former colony at that, how far would we go to support the stance of the U.S. in terms of handling this problem, considering the fact that we as a people have experienced the enormous burden politically, economically of such terrorist attacks from the communists, and most recently the Abu Sayyaf, which is somehow generally has also had links, I mean through the media, with the Bin Laden group. So it's actually a very raw nerve that has been hit in our society, because aside from that, politically and economically, there's really genuine empathy for what happened, because as well, probably among Asians, we're like being referred to as the most American of all Asians. So, and of course, there's also the fact that 1 million Filipinos work there, legally or illegally, and so I think up to right now, around 100 people have not been, you know, have been unaccounted for as of late, you know, in terms of the number of people which have actually died or presumed dead from the disaster.
Well, Jess, I think there's a lot of people who will share your anxiety in this wait and see, unfortunately. Well, thank you very much for your call. Thank you. We have another caller on the line, Rohim. Rohim?
Hi,
you're calling from Singapore then?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, just
a quick point here.
Yeah, a short reaction on for the Muslim community in Singapore. Well, I feel that the reaction of the Muslims in Singapore is the same as all Singaporeans here. That is one of shock and disbelief that this heinous crime is committed against innocent civilians, innocent people. You know, the killing of innocent people cannot be condoned by anyone, by any religion. You know, whether the victim is an American, a Jew, or an Arab, you know, one has to condemn strongly, the strongest of terms, you know, that is wrong. You know, having said that, I think we have to note that there are Muslims, you know, in New York, and there are Muslims in the building that collapsed. So Muslims also suffer, you know, as a result of this disaster. You know, and on a personal note, my sister, who actually arrived in the U.S. one day before the disaster, you know, she's quite nervous because apparently the Americans feel differently now towards Muslims, you know, which I think is a bit irrational and emotional. because I don't think we should put the blame, or rather, for 1 billion Muslims, to be collectively responsible for the act of a few terrorists.
Right. Well, Rohim, thank you very much for calling to share with us that. And I think I might like to add that I've spoken to some of my friends in the U.S. It seems that this antagonism towards Muslims is a feeling that's not shared by everyone, but by pockets of the different societies. Well, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for being here on the show tonight. And thank you for watching Talking Point.
Well, from Frankfurt, the European Central Bank has also been trying to calm fears gripping the market.
The immediate reaction in the markets was somewhat panicky. There's no denying that. And we saw to it that the systems, the payment and settlement systems, kept on working properly, and we try to ensure that if anywhere, because of the lack of communication in the markets, bottlenecks were to appear in the process of settling, then we would stand ready to provide help, including liquidity, of course, if such a thing were to happen.
Wim Duisenberg there, the president of the European Central Bank. As I said a moment ago, Alan Greenspan is trying to fly back to Washington as soon as possible. He's in Switzerland at the moment. Now, let's turn to reaction on the world stock markets. Most of them are now closed for the day on Wednesday. But earlier, traders in Europe observed a minute's silence out of respect for their colleagues and friends in New York. Very little trading took place in the ongoing uncertainty. But let's take a look at how Asia ended the trading day. The Nikkei closed down a massive 682 points. That is a fall of about 6%, so very sharp reaction we saw there on the Asian markets, all of them down very sharply. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong, the Kospi stock market in Seoul, and the Singapore Straits Times Index. Let's quickly look now at how Europe ended the trading day. There was something of a rebound towards the end of the trading day, as you can see from the figures there. Well, for more, let's go live now to the London Stock Exchange and our business reporter, Rebecca Pike. Rebecca, that was the broad picture on the European markets. Bring us up to date on what exactly happened during the trading day in London.
Well, it wasn't a normal trading day at all. It was a very sad and reflective day, and as a result, there wasn't a lot of trading happening. Not many shares passed hands. If we look at what did happen, though, I can tell you that the FTSE 100 closed up 136 points, and in Frankfurt, still trading, but up 95 points, and in Paris, up 54 points. Now, what we've seen today is lots of volatility on all of those exchanges. They've been going up and down, and I think the word that's being used here is directionless. Everyone seems to be waiting for trading to begin again in New York. If that does happen tomorrow, then all eyes will be on what happens there, and I think that markets here will react.
Rebecca, can we even begin to speculate on what happens in the situation where we have a lack of direction from New York if the markets don't reopen?
They have no real specific or credible threats to these embassies, but they'd rather be safe than sorry. Now, while the embassies are closed, there is another effort that's underway. In the words of one State Department official, Darren, it's really a message of, are you with us or are you against us? That's the message Secretary Powell is sending out as he speaks with leaders around the world trying to
poured out of the building after a bomb threat.
It hit me that the building really could blow up, and I was scared. I was afraid that the building literally could blow up underneath my feet.
All around the city, it was a mass migration of hundreds of thousands of people, but uncannily quiet. Perhaps it was the unspeakable horrors many had seen.
It was orderly, but it was chaotic. People were shocked. Everyone was dazed. People didn't really want to look each other in the eye, I think, for fear of breaking down. The question on everybody's lips seemed to be, what is going on, and is there more of it that's going to come?
This was supposed to be Election Day in New York. As if anyone took note, it was officially called off. Everything was. What was open was tightly locked down.
What's that?
Can't be doing no pictures.
Okay, it's NBC
Don't
News.
you understand?
It's NBC News.
I don't care who it is.
Security at all buildings that might be targets was extremely tight. Our own building, the famous tourist destination at Rockefeller Plaza, was evacuated, but for NBC's news operations to bring you this story. And all over Manhattan, there was this strange sort of gridlock.
The uptown avenues in Manhattan have been turned into virtual parking lots as everyone tries to flee northward. Meanwhile, the downtown avenues have all been sealed off, but for emergency vehicles.
Cell phone service came and went. Anxious people called their loved ones the old-fashioned way. Sometimes that didn't work either.
People were forced to use payphones, which is kind of a joke in Manhattan because it's hard to find a payphone that works.
The only thing that was easy today was getting lost in the scramble.
She doesn't have a cell phone. They don't work anyway. She is not mobile because she's got emphysema and she can't walk very fast.
David Douglas's 64-year-old mother lives in an apartment building just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. Soon after the attack, she had chest pains.
I rented a
So he flagged a passing car and the driver headed for the nearest hospital.
But I said, look, lady, please, my mom can't walk. Please just take her north as much as you can because she can't breathe well.
He tried to follow on his rollerblades, but lost track of the car and spent the rest of the day searching hospitals.
So I just want to know, is there any system of finding people with...
Well, they're doing the best. We're doing the best we can. It's pretty chaotic.
He searched family reunion centers.
Lucille Lovato. ABATO.
And even public schools desperate to find his mother.
Are there any people being kept here?
Finally, after 4 hours of futile searching, he called home. There was a message on his answering machine.
It's my mom.
She was safe, staying with a friend in his very own apartment building.
She's in my building.
For 2 New Yorkers, a small moment of comfort in a day when so many others will find none.
NBC's Jane Palmer, Jane Pauley taking us into what occurred and what folks experienced yesterday in the streets of New York City. We are getting word from the Pentagon. We had showed you pictures of an evacuation. The word we're getting now, the fear of fire was apparently a false alarm. The word is fire is contained, but firefighters are still putting out hot spots on the roof. The building no longer being evacuated. People are coming back inside. As you know, the building was reopened in the undamaged parts today. We have a new animation to depict what occurred yesterday, and that shows the area of damage after the plane plunged into the E-ring of the Pentagon yesterday, and that's a very graphic example or demonstration of what occurred there after the impact. NBC's Colleen Dominguez is going to join us now from outside Los Angeles Airport. Colleen, my understand we're still waiting for official word from the FAA that these airports can reopen. Would LAX be prepared to do that should the word come down?
Well, Lester, it looks as if no airport is going to be prepared to do anything anytime soon. What we're understanding from the Department of Transportation is that all domestic aircraft in the United States are now on indefinite ground hold. So that means nothing is going to happen at any airport, including here at LAX, anytime soon, because the FAA is not yet ready to implement increased security measures. There's a lot going on, and because it's already the afternoon over there on the East Coast, it just doesn't seem that there would be enough time to get these measures implemented and get planes off the ground. Airport officials here have said that we'll possibly see security measures such as no curbside check-in of luggage. There possibly could be canine patrol, stringent bag searches, uniform security at airports, or increased uniform security at airports. At Logan International at Boston, they're talking about no parking 200 feet within a terminal. That would be almost impossible here at LAX. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of very close parking spaces, and any of these changes are going to make taking off, getting planes up in the air, just gridlock, getting passengers here. So everything is on hold. Earlier today, LAX officials held a press briefing. We're hopeful that things would be lifted today. Let's go ahead and listen to Bernard Wilson. He's the chief of police of airport police here at LAX.
We're waiting for the FAA to tell us, and the airlines, when they're prepared to accept aircraft into the airspace of the United States.
And do they expect that today?
Can't speculate. We were waiting for Secretary.
Downtown Manhattan, the Twin Towers used to poke into the sky. Now there's just space. A lot of things missing in New York today. That New York attitude, gone for now. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
And I must say to Paul, up there in New York, even from our perspective here in Atlanta, many of those of us who have visited New York so many times, that is eerie to see a city that quiet and that somber. Well, let's talk now about the investigation into finding out exactly who is responsible for this. Officials are saying that early investigation into these deadly attacks point to Islamic extremist and alleged terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden. Our national correspondent Mike Betcher is joining us here on the set. He's got the latest for us on the investigation, and you've been checking out things. And I want to ask you, first of all, in looking at what you've heard and seen so far and talking to those you have, has anyone said to you that they think that the 4 attacks that happened yesterday were the only 4 that were planned? Because that, to me, would seem sort of strange to think that any group that could be so efficient that they would have 100% effectiveness or efficiency here.
Well, I was told by one source that they wanted to ensure, they're speculating now, but that these groups obviously wanted to ensure that they were successful. In other attempts that have occurred, usually a quarter or a half or sometimes none of the efforts work. But there was a concern, is this over? And no one can answer that question.
All right, well, how close now are they getting to actually identifying who they think it's going to, if they're going to be going after here?
Well, in the United States, the search is centering on 3 fronts. First, that car that was seized at Logan International Airport in Boston. Inside the car were flight training manuals. They're looking at that car. We've confirmed independently that indeed there are interesting items inside of that car that FBI agents want to look at. Also, another car was seized at Daytona Airport. In that car, again, there were items in Arabic apparently relating to Osama bin Laden, and that is the reason they are looking at that car. It has been towed away and is being looked at. And at a second location in Florida, in Venice, a couple there has been questioned by the FBI. They run a flight school, and they say that the FBI indicated to them that maybe 2 of their former students a year ago may have had something to do with the attacks yesterday, Leon.
Let me ask you about the material you said that was found in Boston, because our Bill Delaney was on about maybe an hour and a half or so ago, and he was saying that there was some concern that that information may actually be false information floating out there, because they would find it, because the experts he talked to found it so hard to believe that you would find something left behind that would be an Arabic flight training manual. Is something as specific as that being left behind in the wake of this?
Well, let me give you an example. The Daytona car may provide some answers to that. Maybe these people wanted those cars to be found, because we have indications in the Daytona car that information was left very obvious relating to Osama bin Laden, that it was left out there for people to see. So, you know, you can speculate all you want about this, and it's difficult to know. The agents, the intelligence analysts themselves are really wrestling with this issue, and to second-guess a terrorist is a difficult thing to do.
All right, what about the overseas cooperation that we've been hearing about so much lately? That the U.S. is going to be seeking it from other states, other entities overseas. And we've heard also that many folks in the intelligence community are concerned that there is no human intelligence, at least not like there used to be. The U.S. doesn't have as many people on the ground in different places. Any concern that that fact alone will prevent them from finding out exactly who is responsible?
No, they do not think it will prevent them from finding out who is responsible for this. And what they're looking at is information that they developed over the last 2 years, that Al-Qaeda is not a group, it's a network. And I think Secretary Powell said the same thing this morning. It is a network, and this network has been mutating over the past 2 years, and they've been trying to study this mutation. For example, Al-Qaeda has been reaching out to other terrorist groups, especially in North Africa and especially Algerians. And in 1994, for example, the only other case kind of similar to this was a hijacking that went bad for the Algerian terrorist group GIA, which has contacts to bin Laden. And in that case, they wanted to ram that jet into the Eiffel Tower, but that did not work. And so they're looking at that. They're also looking at possible significance of dates. Why did this happen in September? They know that bin Laden recently, and if you look at his most recent videotape that came out a few months ago, in that tape, he really embraces the Palestinian Intifada, which is a real shift for bin Laden. In the past, it has been American presence overseas. So they are looking at possible symbolism of September, going back to Black September, which was the radical Palestinian group that hijacked 4 planes back in 1970. 3 of those were successful hijackings, and also they were responsible for the Munich massacre during the Olympics. So they're looking at all of these things, going through their files, but nothing hard yet.
And it's a great indicator of just how much work there is to be done here. Mike Boettcher, thank you very much. We'll be talking with you throughout the day on this one. Darren, over to you.
Leon, thank you. The stories about so many things, of course, fear and shock about what has happened to the United States. On a very practical matter, though, for many travelers, it means they are stuck wherever they were yesterday morning and they can't get home. Originally, the FAA had said early as possible the air restrictions on U.S. airspace would be lifted at noon today. We reported over an hour ago that that was not going to happen at noon. We have yet to hear what time that could be reinstated, but meanwhile, we're getting word that when flights do resume in the U.S., they will look very different than what we are used to as Americans. And with more on that, let's go to the White House, and our Kelly Wallace is standing by with more information on that. Kelly.
Well, Darren, obviously a big concern for many passengers around the country, but certainly a big concern for the administration. Senior administration officials telling my colleague John King just a short time ago that the full expectation is that Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta would have some announcement later today. Now, that the reason that this 12 noon Eastern time deadline has come and gone, we had senior administration officials telling CNN last night that the full expectation was that the airports would open at 12 noon Eastern time. The senior officials saying that the reason that deadline has come and gone and that the airports have not been reopened is that they really haven't had enough time to put sufficient security precautions in place. We heard Secretary Mineta say last night that they are going to impose tougher security guidelines and measures at the nation's airports before they reopen. Now, I did talk to another law enforcement source earlier who said, look, the U.S. government wants to be comfortable. It certainly wants to open up the airports as quickly as possible, get people back to normal, get you...
Yep. Yeah, because, you know, all of us, the whole family lives within 4 miles, so word came around quick, and when we heard American, we all, you know, try not to think it's going to happen, and she usually does turnarounds to Miami, and just this month, her schedule, they switched it to have her do the West Coast. She's going to try to switch it back.
Betsy, before this is all over, we are going to hear a lot of names. We are going to put a lot of faces to this tragedy, and no doubt many of us will know people who perished in this. We are all going through our own emotions. I know there's grief. Are you angry, and who are you angry at?
You know, I am, because, you know, I'm sure everyone is, and you always hear when people pass away, oh, you know, whoever passed, she was the best, she was the greatest, but we have a large family, and Michelle has such a strong network of people, and she was a saint, and that's what's so ironic, of all people. She did everything for all of us. I mean, I had a bad accident several years ago, broke some bones, and I was on. She was the first one here. Did for every one of us, she's done something that we've known her through our lives, and the first one to do any help, and it's with anybody else. She had, between her tennis friends, and she did charity work, and through her kids' school.
It's not that I oppose alimony, but we were never really married.
How can you say that, Evan? We were married for 3 years.
But you're gay. You were never sexually attracted to me. It's fraud.
Look, these are the same arguments made at trial court. You lost a nullification. We didn't lose. They certified it to the Court of Appeals because they recognized that we may have a case.
All right, let's not get off track. You do not deny being gay.
No.
Right. And forgive my intrusiveness. You made love to him even though you were really attracted to women.
Yes.
And a little threesome action?
Richard.
I'm the one who got hurt, and I'm the one being asked to pay.
Evan, I tried to love you.
Yeah. Sure.
Maybe if you're with the right guy.
Richard. Look, we offered you $40,000 structured over... And if that's your final offer, then I guess we go to appeals. Fine.
Fine? Fine.
Fine.
Could come into Ashcroft.
And another victory in the state.
Those blows are all landing. Foster is hurt. They're all landing. About a minute and a half left to go in the round. While he may be a little tired himself, maybe that's why he cannot follow up.
He's ready, he's ready. He's ready to go.
Referee John Clauder looking at both men. A minute left to go in round number 11.
Let's go. Let's go.
Some of those blows are going through, some are blocked. The right lead did score.